Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Southworth and I work for EDF Renewables UK and Ireland. And we're here today in Glasgow at the Cop26 conference. I am so excited to be here. This is my home city, so I am very proud that COP is being hosted here. What are we here to do today? We're here to talk to you about onshore wind. And what I wanted to do was introduce some people who work in onshore wind, because often we get caught up in the numbers, the megawatts, the number of turbines, how big a wind farm is. But I think what's really important is to look to the people who actually work in the industry, and that's everyone from the technicians who operate the wind farm once it's built, to the landowners, to the communities with whom we work very closely to get any onshore wind farm built, and we work with them for the duration of that as well. Now, only a few weeks ago, EDF Renewables UK and Ireland and several other industry members with Renewable UK put to the UK government that there should be a new target for onshore wind, and that is to reach 30 gigawatts by 2030. That would mean a massive amount of investment in the UK and Ireland. It would mean about £45 billion of economic investment, and it would also mean 27,000 jobs, which I think we can all agree is not to be sniffed at. Our UK have also recently done some polling, and in the UK it's clear that 70% of people support onshore wind as an industry, which again is an incredible number. So I have got some guests with me here today who we're going to talk to over the next wee while. There's 10 of them, and the first two guests are Craig Duffy, our Head of Onshore Wind at EDF Renewables, and Sarah Dooley, one of our Principal Development Managers. Craig, I'm going to come to you first, and it's really just a chat about your job and about why onshore wind is so important. So first of all, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us exactly what you do?
So I'm Craig Duffy. I'm Head of Onshore Wind at EDF Renewables. That role is very much focused on the investment in new onshore wind projects. We take it from the consent, possibly for where Sarah comes in before then, and we take it to try and get it to an investment decision. So we try to de-risk the project, and really that's a collaborative role. We work across our organisation, we work with other stakeholders, we work with people with industry to be able to de-risk a project to the point where we can say we are happy to invest in that. How did I get here, I suppose? I've been in this role for around about 6-7 months. Before that, I've been at EDF Renewables for around 4 years, working on offshore, working on a number of projects in the onshore space as well, around about valuation, investment appraisal, and that goes back to where I was before renewables. So I started career as a banker, and I'm an accountant, so I will probably drop some numbers and figures in there as much as you want to get away from it. But essentially, you know, I joined RBS. I was very interested at that time in Scotland, and very much Scotland punching above its weight in terms of what it does. RBS at that time was being marketed as one of the biggest companies in the world. Obviously we know what happened, but what it did get a big exposure to was a lot of oil and gas, and there's a lot of conversation about that, but I think my key learning was that Scotland had this amazing sector off the back of oil and gas in terms of what it could do in services, what it could export to the rest of the world, because of the learnings in being in something very quickly. And that's also one of the things that attracted me to renewables, and particularly onshore wind in Scotland, given how much of a success story it's been.
So for EDF Renewables itself, obviously I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but we do have, I think it's we've got 8 onshore wind farms in Scotland, but in total we've got about 35 across the UK. So it's a lot, and we plan to build a lot more than that, about 5 times that in fact if you include Ireland. So, you know, big companies like EDF, other big companies are investing in onshore wind. Why is that?
So I think onshore wind is a key part of what we call the energy mix going forward to meet net zero. I think that often we get asked how important is onshore wind, particularly with other technologies on the go as well. And I suppose I always come back to, well, how important is net zero? Because if you listen to the Committee on Climate Change around about what onshore wind needs to be there to be able to deliver net zero, if you look at any sort of independent forecasts around about how we achieve net zero in the UK and beyond, onshore wind requires significant deployment from where it is now. And when I talk about where it is now as well, we shouldn't forget that we've deployed over 14 gigawatts of onshore wind in the UK already. And if you take that as a success story for Scotland in particular, you have over 8 gigawatts there, and we're already delivering 97% of renewable generation against our electricity demand in Scotland. And onshore wind is a key part of that. I think also onshore wind represents a lot of what is good about the energy transition. We talk about just transition, and for me, of all the technologies, onshore wind is the one that does that more than anything else. We deliver significant investment, significant new jobs, particularly in rural communities. We have community benefit funds that span the life of the assets and invest in projects and various sort of opportunities for local communities throughout the life of that. Even during the pandemic last year, we had various examples of not just our own projects, but projects across the sector that supported communities throughout that. And I think when you talk about public support, I think that's where a lot of public support comes from. They see those benefits, they see what onshore wind can bring. You've talked about the 30 gigawatt target, and the 45 billion and 27,000 jobs. It's significant for the UK as a whole, and beyond all of that, there are two things. One is it's the lowest cost of generation, or at least among the lowest cost of generation for new technology. And I think going beyond the numbers, what I've found in the industry in the time I've been here is a large amount of really passionate people who are passionate about delivering net zero, passionate about the climate change, passionate about the communities they work with and everything that goes with onshore wind. And that's why I think it is a significant and important part of what we want to deliver in the UK as a developer and as a country.
Well, I mean, you talked a little bit about the kind of people. I know you're more of a numbers guy, Craig, but it is really important to factor in, you know, onshore wind isn't just about sticking up some turbines. There's a lot more to it than that. We're later on going to speak to one of the members of our communities around one of our wind farms. But, you know, we can't place enough importance on that, can we?
No, we certainly can. And as I say, I think it's a differentiation of onshore wind to some other technologies that are out there. And in our own industry, we know even through the last year as a business, we've grown our business by a significant number of people even through a pandemic. And as I said earlier, we have people like Sarah, like anyone you'll talk to today, who are seeing the benefits of onshore wind across whether it's their communities, whether it's their own companies, whether it's their own job and prospects and development, and whether it's just feeling part of the just transition of delivering net zero. It is clearly something that creates a lot of passion amongst people.
So, I mean, the Scottish Government's net zero target is 2045, UK Government is 2050. We've heard a lot of chat at COP already. It's only been going for a few days about, you know, India's new target is 2070. How optimistic are you about us getting to net zero in this country?
I'm optimistic because in the UK in particular, I think we've already made a significant start. And if you talk about our ability to deliver onshore wind, we're seeing the right policy levers coming through. We've got the CFD allocation round 4 next year, which will bring onshore and solar back into the mix as well in terms of being able to deploy new projects, which has been something that I think the government understand we need to do. We need that support mechanism. It's not just about money and where the support mechanism is in terms of prices. It's about the confidence that gives the supply chain and the sector and everyone to invest in net zero. But what gives me the most optimism about it is that I think that ultimately investing in renewables, investing in net zero and that transition is what will deliver for companies, jobs and opportunities for people. It is the way forward, and I think it's taken people some time to get around to that fact. But in reality, this is the way in which we are going to create not only just a just economy, but an economy that's wealthy and can actually do and address the climate change emergency that we have here.
Now, I'm going to ask you a bit of a personal question, hope you don't mind. I know you've got 2 young children. What do your family and friends and your kids think about you working in renewables? Do they have a view on it? Do they understand it? Or?
I think more than anything, my children understand what I do now. My children really were too young to understand what I did anyway when I worked in banking and sort of consultancy. I think it's nice to be able to sort of tangibly say this is kind of what I do. Like, I know there are far more qualified people and better people who go out to wind farms and work on them. You'll speak to some of them later today. But to be able to go past wind farms and windmills and sort of explain that is ultimately the culmination of the work that I do is much better than trying to explain what a spreadsheet is to them at 5 years old. So I do feel that for personally, it's much better to be able to do my children, family and friends. I think they understand how critical this is, and doing this type of role in this industry. I think regardless of where it is, what it is, level that it is, I think people have a lot of respect for people trying to do what they can to address what is a significant problem, which can't be addressed alone. We all have to work together.
And then I was just going to ask you, we're here at COP, obviously, which is fantastic, and just across the river, that's where the decisions are going to be made, hopefully, and agreements made. What would your message be to the delegates who are at COP and to the world leaders that are here?
I think, it's simple. We need to act now. It's a climate emergency, and an emergency requires an emergency response. And I think for too long it's been a strong response, but not an emergency response. And that can go to the micro level of things we talk about, even here in Scotland, around about planning and systems to deliver net zero, but it goes well beyond to the macro level of people working together. You've talked about different targets for different countries. Ideally, you want to see that all align and come together. We've seen some positive noises already. Hopefully we see more as the week goes on.
Okay, Craig, thanks very much. I might come back to you, so don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself, first of all?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. My name is Sarah Dooley. I'm one of the Principal Project Development Managers at EDF Renewables. I've been at EDF for 4 years now, but I've been working in onshore wind development since 2003. So I've seen quite a few changes over that time in terms of policy, in terms of public opinion. But being here at COP, it's such an exciting event. It's an exciting time for renewables, and it's an exciting time for onshore wind. There was a bit of a dip in the in the market, so to speak, a few years ago when the renewable obligation certificates were withdrawn for onshore wind. But as Craig's been saying, there's an opportunity for us next year for the CFD auctions, to bring us back in line on that. But yeah, there's a lot happening. Development it's a very exciting time, and things have changed a lot in the 18 years I've been doing this. We've gone from, turbines that might generate enough electricity for about 800 homes to turbines now that will generate 3, if not 4 times that. It's a real step change, and I think that the public are sort of coming along this journey with us, and public opinion is incredibly positive. That statistic you quoted earlier of 70%, it's amazing to think that 70% of people want to see more onshore wind deployed across the UK, and I think as the UK we should be incredibly proud of that. We've led the way, particularly in onshore wind, for a long time, and I think that there are representatives from other countries that are here in Glasgow for the next few weeks who will be looking at us and thinking, these guys have done a really good job. They've sort of set out their stall. Now we need to continue to do that, and we need to be stretching to get to those targets. And this 30 gigawatts of onshore wind by 2030 is it's a target. It's aspirational. We really should be pushing as an industry to deliver that.
Excellent. So Craig's team and what Craig does, they look at the prospects of a site perhaps, and then, when we're going forward, you and your team would be the people who would pick that up and do a lot of hard work. And I just really wanted you to just describe exactly what the development team does, because it's a hugely complex process to get a planning permission.
It is. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Lindsay. So the development team take a project from basically from initial site identification. So that can literally just be, a line on a map. We take it from that through sort of early feasibility, where we look at constraints that there might be to development. So whether that's proximity of properties or designated sites for ecological or hydrological reasons, technical constraints such as access, aviation, all of these things. And we sort of consider whether or not a site might be suitable, whether it has any feasibility. And then once we've done that, we sort of take the next steps, engaging with landowners, engaging with expert consultants who would give us a view from their perspective, all from an independent view, and we engage with local communities and sort of try to bring forward the best designed sites in the best locations, really. But it's a long process from that initial site identification through to a planning consent, where we would then pass the project on to Craig's team while still sort of supporting through that process. You can be talking about 5 years easily. For example, just to put into context, we would probably need to do 2 years of bird survey work on a site. So that alone is sort of, quite a lengthy period, and rightly so. It's important that we know what's there. We establish a baseline, and then from that baseline we then do an assessment to determine, well, what impact would our wind farm, if sited in this location, what impact would that have? So it's a long process, it's a complex process, but as I say to my team, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Absolutely. I was going to go back to the kind of bird surveys and the environmental aspect of things, because sometimes that's what people who maybe object to an onshore wind farm would not be happy about. But I guess it's just a kind of reassurance piece that we absolutely do our due diligence, and would take kind of extra measures if we had to, if there was a particular bird of interest around a site.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are specific guidance. There's specific guidance that we follow, a lot of which in Scotland is sort of implemented by SEPA or Nature Scot, for example, and we follow that guidance to ensure that we get as much of that data as possible, and we then, once we've made that assessment of what the impact of our wind farm would be in a particular location, we then discuss with our consultants who are providing that expert advice about, well, what could we do to mitigate an impact? So you can mitigate an impact by doing things such as habitat enhancement, for example. So you'd maybe be creating an area adjacent to a wind farm site that the birds would rather go than to stay on the wind farm site itself. So there's a lot of research being done. There are a lot of operational wind farms in Scotland where that habitat enhancement sort of idea has been implemented for a good number of years, and there's a requirement to continue to monitor that. So there is a lot of information out there that proves that these sorts of things work, and that's just one example. There are an awful lot of mitigation and also enhancement measures, so it doesn't necessarily need to be the idea to mitigate an impact. It could be, well, we're developing a project, but actually here's an opportunity for us to enhance the local environment. So whether it's the environment specifically, so birds and things that live there, or whether it's something like recreational enhancement. So we're supporting rangers, or we're investing in an upgrade of a path network to encourage more people to go out and about, into the countryside. So there's an awful lot that we can do as part of that development process.
Yeah, and I think one example of that, we've got our Dornell wind farm, which is in Moray in Scotland, and we've got 2 rangers there, and we've got a visitor centre, and they're very active encouraging people to do, walks, and they've been guiding people on walks actually. So it's quite nice that you're able to be part of a community in that respect. And I know at the start you talked about all your experience. I know you've worked in onshore wind for a long time. Is there one project that you're particularly proud of, and why would that be?
I would have to say one of my earlier projects. So I developed for EDF Renewables a project called Burnfoot Hill. It's in the Ochils, in sort of just north of the central belt of Scotland, and it started out as a 13 turbine 26 megawatt project, and it was a huge success. It brought recreational enhancement benefits, it brought community benefits, and there was sort of a story to tell around those 13 turbines and the positive things that project had done. And then subsequently there were opportunities to extend that wind farm. It's gone from being 13 turbines to 21 turbines. So off the back of all of those positive things that the original 13 brought to the community, those have been, have been doubled. So the community benefit, the recreational enhancement fund. We also support the Ochils Mountain Rescue. Yeah. All really important things. And, when I see posts on Facebook about the mountain rescue team having, been out and done something amazing, as they often do, I feel incredibly proud to have been involved in that project that continues to deliver benefits. And we're talking about a project that will be in situ for another 20 years. So there's an awful lot more that project will still deliver.
And I have to say, having been to a few wind farms in my time, I think it is the most beautiful one that we have. sorry to all the other ones. But yeah, I was going to ask you as well, obviously the same question as I asked to Craig. We're here in Glasgow. It's amazing to be here. What would your kind of message be to everyone involved in COP? What do they really need to focus on?
Yeah, as Craig said, there have been some, already in the first few days, some really positive announcements, and I think we need to be going as a world we need to be making commitments, and we need to be making steps, and targets for for 2070 and beyond are not going to cut the mustard. We really need to be focusing on what can we do quickly, and how can we limit this change, how can we limit this temperature increase to the 1.5 degrees that that we all aspire to. So that's exactly what I would say. It is an emergency, it's a climate emergency, and clearly in an emergency you need to do something.
Great. Craig and Sarah, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to exit the stage and bring in our next guests, who I will introduce once they've had a seat, but thank you very much, really interesting.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you. Okay, just go back to here. So I am just about to welcome our next two guests, who are going to talk about things from a landowner perspective. So I'm just welcoming His Grace the Duke of Roxburgh, who has our Falago Rig wind farm on the Roxburgh estate, and Jaap Rol, who is the Managing Director of Roxburgh Estates. Thank you very much for coming this morning. Nice to see you both. Charlie, it's okay to call you that.
Absolutely,
yes.
thank you.
So Charlie, just tell us a little bit about how you got involved in onshore wind with Roxburgh Estates.
So really that goes back to just after the turn of the century, where back to sort of 2004, 2005, and my father was very much in charge of the estate then. And I think he was, really very forward-thinking, as estates need to be when they're coming to diversify and looking at the assets across the portfolio. And our estate has a considerable acreage in the borders. It's agricultural. There's a lot of forestry. We've got other leisure activities there as well. And so I think it was my father looking to the future, looking at a 20, 50-year plan for the estate, and realising that carbon neutrality, even back then, was something which he was already seeing a trend on. So he had been one of the first landowners to look at biomass in a big way, which is something that Jaap and I are now continuing to do, with forestry being a more important asset for the next 50 years. Dad was very forward thinking about wind energy. So with a developer before EDF got involved in our wind farm, they were scoping out various locations on the estate where it could have been a potential site for it. What became Falago was deemed to be a fantastic location for it, and over quite a considerable planning phase, it then went operational in 2013, and has produced all sorts of different benefits since then.
It's quite big, Falago, actually. It's just for everyone else's reference, it's 48 turbines, it's 144 megawatts, so it's not an insignificant, but the land was there to support that.
Absolutely. I mean, there was also other variables that were also made it a fantastic location. The wind power on that site is very consistent and very strong. It already had considerable infrastructure there as well. It had a power line coming through from the nuclear power station in East Lothian straight through that location, which meant building a substation there was more straightforward than it would be in other locations. And also the other infrastructure alongside a power line had a substantial road going through it too. So the disturbance to the environment there would have been lower than it would have been in other locations, and that critical infrastructure was key too. So yeah, it is a big site there, and but one which is of national significance, which what's going on here in Glasgow, that's what you need things of national significance to move the dial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're going to reach our targets, we need to think big, don't we? In terms of, you said your dad was forward thinking, he'd thought about all this before, but do you remember the kind of reaction in the borders, and perhaps with, you employ a lot of people at Roxburgh Estates, what was the reaction when you were going to kind of build this wind farm? Was it positive? Was it negative?
I think that you've got to take it in context of where it was 15 years ago. I think that people at those days, it did meet its own challenges, and particularly some of those who live in the immediate locality. The visual impact was something which did have its own challenges getting people to see that. However, the positive stories about what's come out of that, I think, over the course of the last 15 years, has validated the decisions to build that wind farm. We have something called the Falago Environment Fund, which has put nearly £2 million directly into local projects in East Lothian and the borders. And over the course of 2020, last year, with all of the issues with COVID, we actually had the flexibility within that fund to direct just short of £200,000 into particularly COVID-related issues.
Yeah.
So I think that just directly in terms of that foundation, which has been set up for the borders, nearly £2 million into all sorts of different things, which I think will have inadvertently touched almost everybody in the borders in some shape or form. But beyond that, the investment, which the revenues from the wind farm has allowed us to then reinvest in the estate. And so, in a traditional estate, you're always looking to diversify, but then the revenues from that is now going back into improving our residential property portfolio, into creating Floors Castle, as it is now a 5-star tourist attraction in the Scottish borders. The money from Falago is being used to reinvest into the borders, which is creating jobs. We're much like EDF has. We've now got our own apprenticeship scheme. So every department across the estate has now has either got or is going to get an apprentice, which is
right, great.
That in itself, working with the Borders College, was something that Yap and his team have set up. So it's the direct involvement of things in the wind farm are fantastic. It's the indirect things and the secondary investment which we're making across the estate, which is going to be of benefit to not just Kelso but the whole of the surrounding area around the borders, with increased employment, and it's made the estate more viable. So as a big employer in the borders, we're becoming a bigger and more important one, and it's Falago has been critical in that.
And it is a beautiful estate. I have been myself. It's very nice, so I would recommend a visit. I was going to say as well, so there might be there's landowners everywhere with vast amounts of land who might not have even considered something like a wind farm. And what would you say to them? And is it worth thinking about? I think you would probably say yes.
Well, for us, it's been transformational in terms of diversification, and we're leaving the European Union over the course. We have left the European Union, but then what will the effects of that will be felt over the next few years with the changes in the rural economy. Support for farmers will change. So I think that my father getting on the front foot and looking at a diversification from more traditional land uses has been a very positive thing. So for our estate, it's been transformational. It's been something which means we can reinvest in other parts of the estate. Yap come from Goodwood, which is an estate down in the south of England where he'd worked for 10 years beforehand, and so looked at taking a commercial view of their estate in the way that they could take things forward. If we've got acres on areas which are suitable, I think absolutely wind farms are absolutely ideal, but it's got to be in the context of where they are. And as I said, touched on beforehand, that forestry and carbon trading is something which is now coming up to the higher up the agenda as something that maybe wouldn't have done 10 years ago. So I think it's always taking at these types of opportunities at a moment in time when they're most appropriate. Had you been building a wind farm 40 years ago in Scotland, it would have met more resistance. People wouldn't have understood it. I think that where we are in terms of the climate emergency, these types of projects are absolutely the right moment to be really investing in them in every possible way.
Yeah, and I think Sarah had touched on previously, there is a change in public opinion. I think when you speak to people, they do realise that we need to do something now. What would you say to everyone who's across the river at COP, these world leaders that we've heard from in the past couple of days? Why should they kind of take notice of onshore wind in particular, do you think?
Well, I think that particularly for the guys who've been here in Glasgow, I think it's a case of leadership, and that the UK has been, in particular Scotland, has been very, very on the forefront of renewable energies and wind. We've got the ability to do that here because we can take leadership. I think it's it's been a great disappointment. There've been some countries haven't necessarily followed that leadership which Europe has done. But from a world leader perspective, they need to be looking at the northern European countries who have made that jump already. I think from our own leaders here, I would like to see that the the leadership they've shown needs to then be trickled down into all of their government departments. Planning is a major issue here in the UK with anything to do with projects of this scale, and that it needs to come down, top-down approach, whether it's globally or nationally as well, to actually achieve these aims and allow the granular accessibility to actually making sure that this does actually happen. And I think that's the next stage for them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we are championing is that, in Scotland in particular, when planners are looking at, planning applications, they should have the climate emergency at the forefront of.
Well, I think that needs to be at the top of the piece of paper.
Yeah, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes. So Yaf, I'm just going to move over to you. So you're the managing director of Roxburgh Estates. I mean, you're relatively newish in the role.
Very.
So, I mean, what have you learned about onshore wind since you started?
It's been a bit of a learning curve in terms of the element that it brings to an estate and the portfolio management. If you look at it, an estate is no different than an investment portfolio. And so it is one of the central pillars within our business, and therefore is a great contributor, and it allows us to reinvest, as Charlie already said, in other parts of the business. It's not entirely alien to me, coming from a flat country just to the east of us.
What country is that? Yeah.
Holland, where obviously people have been harnessing wind energy for many, many generations, just to keep the country dry. It's not alien to me, so I'm actually very pleased to see that in the UK we are now also starting to embrace that more and harness the energy that is there for free to benefit us as a country, our economies and our rural communities.
In terms of, you're managing the people who work on the estate, what's their view of Falago from the start, or maybe you don't know, maybe from the start and to now? Has it changed? Do they just accept it now? Is it something they're proud of?
It definitely has changed. Joining the estate in 2020, I spent quite a bit of time speaking obviously to and getting to know all of our team, and I could notice when I was talking about it that originally when the Duke's father started off Falago, that a lot of people were a little bit sort of apprehensive towards it, thinking about the landscape and the effect that it had. But I think over time they've actually realized that the impact that it has on them is much less in the negative sense, and actually a lot of them have grown to really appreciate the wind farm as part of the overall landscape, and have really come to terms with the actual benefits that it's bringing the local community, but also the estate and the estate's ability to reinvest.
Okay. I mean, some people would say, Falago has been around for quite some time. Some people might say, we've got too many onshore wind farms in particular in the borders. What would your view be of that?
I think it's a natural reaction, and humans always do this, that they always look at their own immediate surroundings. I would say to those people, why don't you go and spend some time going across Northern Europe and look at what has been developed in areas, and I think that the density here is actually quite low. But more importantly, we have this free energy. So why not harness it? Why not make the best of it? I can see the point in people arguing that you might want to concentrate it in certain areas where you have the best wind speeds, and therefore it is the most productive. That I totally understand and support, but at the same time I think if you have something that is there to be harnessed, why not use it? Because as throughout human evolution we've become much more dependent on energy, and actually electricity is obviously at the forefront now. So we have the ability to produce it locally with actually a limited amount of investment. So it's almost sort of a no-brainer. Why aren't you harnessing that more?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask, you've mentioned the biomass that the estate has, you've got the wind farm as well. Are there any other things that you're doing, looking towards, the electric future? Do you have electric cars? Is that something you would consider for the estate, or? I
think over time we will definitely, as the technology becomes better, the fleet of vehicles that we run will be converted to electric or hydrogen, depending on what is most sort of suitable. I think agricultural machinery are more likely to become hydrogen powered, but for estate vehicles used by the maintenance team or other teams, I think that converting that to electric over time is almost a sort of logical consequence. And the technology is moving forward so quickly that I think that that's becoming more and more feasible, and it's obviously also supported by government. I think
just on the vehicle fleet, I mean, I think that something that's very close to my heart anyway, but I think that it's the infrastructure that needs to improve, and we're absolutely dedicated to ensuring that we're moving with the times, as we always do with everything on Roxburgh. It's simply just down to the fact that the infrastructure for charging points in the borders is not what it is in the urban areas.
Yeah.
The moment that starts to improve, and we have actually got charging points being installed at the moment, both at the leisure area we have for our retail outlets at the castle and at the actual house itself, but in terms of having, you know, the types of use which we have for vehicles requires quite large mileages and going to some very remote places, so the charging structure just doesn't quite work at the moment. But I think just an additional point, and we mentioned biomass, you know, we are constantly reviewing all of the policies we have on the estate and actually the land uses. So I've mentioned already about forestry and carbon, which is something which we're, you know, looking at, and again taking a long-term view on it. But Jaap and his team are also, you know, really mapping out the estate, and we're looking at everything from, you know, potential solar areas and other land uses, and the borders, you know, will have strengths and weaknesses in terms of all different types of renewable energies. But we will be absolutely looking at every scheme that is viable for us.
Okay.
Some of the, just coming back to that, some of the upland areas that we have across the estate, we've also looked at small hydro schemes. They're not of significance for the complete sort of community, but actually we've discovered that there were small hydro setups run in previous generations and that have then just been forgotten about. And so we're looking at which kind of schemes could we reintroduce and sort of work that can actually provide power within a smaller local network, but each of these little elements together will sort of contribute to the bigger scheme.
It's clear from what you've both described that Roxburgh Estates really is at the forefront of thinking about net zero and thinking about all climate change and how you can improve things. I mean, Jaap, from your position, what would you say? I mean, you've worked on other estates, there's lots of other estates out there. What would you say to them if they're not quite as far forward? Because it takes quite a lot of impetus to make these things happen. It's not easy. What would your advice be to them?
There's a number of things. I think the first one is be brave, because in order to move forward, you sometimes have to make decisions that might not always be popular at that very moment. But over time, I think the community around it will also become more supportive. You mentioned it earlier that the overall way that onshore wind is looked at is changing. I think the generational change is also bringing that with it. I think younger generations understand the amount of electricity they use and are thinking about where that's actually coming from. So I think that those kind of things all come together. Also, from an estate's point of view, it is part of a logical mix of income streams, potentially, that are not just there for the estate itself, but also the broader community around it, and embrace technology, because the technology is moving forward so quickly and there are so many new opportunities coming with that. And I think that in some cases, estates in the past have perhaps been a little bit slow at reacting, and I wouldn't describe it as sleepy, but sort of a bit conservative, whereas actually there are some huge opportunities out there, and if you embrace it and work with the right partners, you can bring things forward very quickly.
Yeah.
Lindsay, just taking that one step forward, I mean, I think there's an element of push and pull on this. You know, I think that we've been at the forefront of it, and actually that's given us the opportunity to help, you know, to start to shape that. There are a lot of the discussions around it, and, you know, the protocols around it, and so on and so forth. So I think that the state's not looking to embrace it, potentially will be slightly left behind. And as Yap says, the technology is fast moving, and so be at the forefront, be part of the discussion rather than really being dragged and forced to do various changes rather than actually embracing them.
Okay, that's great. And later on we're going to hear from Sean, who actually manages the team of 9 technicians that are at Falago, which will be interesting to hear from them. But thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Also,
I'm going to ask our next set of guests to come in. Thank you very much. So our next 2 guests are going to be talking about the construction of an onshore wind farm. So I'm now joined by Ian Graham, who is the head of construction at EDF Renewables, and I'm joined by Scott Brown, who is from I&H Brown, which is a civil engineering company which is used on a number of EDF's wind farms. So welcome to both of you this morning. Thank you for coming. Ian, first of all, head of construction, it's a big role and there's a lot to be done. So I mean, for people who are watching this, how do you even start to think about building an onshore wind farm?
Well, it starts early on. So the key is our team getting involved in the early stages. So you would have heard from Sarah earlier on. We get involved right at the very start in development and make sure we know the projects once they come to construction, and we can input in that development stage. Every project, I think Scott will agree here, every project is different. There's not 2 wind farm onshore projects that are the same. You'll know that as well. But what you can bank on is challenges and unique challenges. So it's really getting in there early and being prepared for them.
And so, I mean, what's your background? How have you got to this position that you're building all these wind farms?
Well, I've 6 years at EDF, but I probably about 20 years in renewables. To be honest, I stumbled into it. I was a civil engineer. Started doing some foundation designs for turbines and substation designs, but absolutely loved it. And I think what you can say about the renewable industry is the passion. Everybody you meet is really passionate about the industry, and I kept going with that. I then worked with a turbine manufacturer for 6 or so years, and then came into EDF as a construction project manager.
So it's quite a different, it's quite a different side of things, working for a turbine manufacturer. That's kind of one part of what you're doing now. But how do you plan out exactly what's happening when you're going to build something? What's the first steps you take?
Well, as I say, we were involved early, and then when it's getting close to handed over to us, our first kind of involvement where we're leading is the closing of the procurement or the contracts. Typically, onshore wind, you've got 3 major contracts. It's the civil contract, the electrical contract, and then the turbine contract. But the start on site, typically for us, is through the civil contractor. So they'll come along, they'll set up on site, then they'll start breaking ground, constructing the access roads, so the roads that get you to each of the turbine locations, which can be very difficult because these wind farms are in very remote areas, typically with steep gradients and all the rest of it. It's then the excavations for the foundations, so where the turbines would sit, and these can be really vast. They can be anywhere around the region of 3 metres deep and 25 metres wide. So they're big holes in the ground that we then fill with steel reinforcement, and then do the concrete pouring the concrete in. And that's quite an event on the kind of civil calendar, because that really is the big thing in the civil calendar. At West Benhar wind farm that we're building just now with Scott and I&H Brown, we've got our first foundation pour tomorrow morning.
Right, great.
And we're getting prepared for that. Those can last, these pours can last a long time. It can be 7 in the morning until 7 at night that you're doing the pours. The preparation in it is quite vast.
And how many turbines is it at West Benhar?
It's 6. Yeah.
Six turbines. So it's about 30 megawatts, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so once you've done the pour, then when do you see? People will be probably quite used to seeing in Scotland anyway, big lorry loads of turbines and turbine blades and nacelles coming along the road. When does that stage happen? Because that's the kind of exciting stage, isn't it? Really?
Oh, I wouldn't say that to the civil contractor.
Sorry, Scott. The first bit's much more exciting.
But once we've got the civils in place and we've got the electricals in place, the cables and the substation, which is the building on site where we connect all the turbines to the grid, once that's all in place, then we start to deliver the turbines. The logistics of the turbines itself can be a project itself. I mean, I remember my first ever wind farm with EDF was Peerylaw Wind Farm in West Lothian, I should say, which was with I&H Brown actually, and we had to deliver the turbines over a railway bridge. Now that was the Glasgow Central line that was about to get electrified, so it shows you how long ago it was. And it was quite clear if we didn't get the turbines over that bridge at a certain time, then we were delayed for 3 to 6 months. So it added even more pressure to what was already a stressful situation. But we got them to site, and once you get them to site, you obviously have to build them, and this is where the turbine manufacturer contractor comes along. They bring cranes on site, and typically with these onshore wind turbines, you've got about 7 big lifts. The towers are in 3 sections usually, it can be 4 if it's taller wind farms. And then you've got the housing at the top, which we call the nacelle. They've got the gearbox and everything else in there, and then the 3 blades. Once that's up, there's then got commissioning and testing, make sure the turbine's doing as it's meant to do, and then you've got an operational wind farm.
It's quite exciting. I mean, I know you've worked in it for quite a long time, but do you still get that kind of buzz when something's finished and, you know, it's amazing to see it all up there and working and knowing what it's doing?
Construction guys just love building stuff and seeing the things go up. So they absolutely, but I made it sound easy there, but the numbers involved in the sheer scale of it is quite staggering. Dornell Wind Farm, our biggest onshore wind farm, 59 turbines. You know, we had, I think it was 40 kilometres of site access track. You had 200 kilometres of site cables, and concrete you had about 27,000 cubic metres. So it's massive. So it really is big operations. One of the other key things for us is with big operations, you have to make sure that you're being a good neighbour to not only the landowner but the public and the surround. So we make sure we are that good neighbour, because construction is the first time that the public see the wind farm happening. So we make sure we do things like letter drops, keep the public informed, even with deliveries. We've done WhatsApp groups to make people, you were involved in that, Darnell.
Text messaging,
text messaging, all that kind of thing, and make sure we are the good neighbour going forward for the next 25, 30 years of operation.
And one of the other things, just talking about Dornell, sometimes the weather at some of our sites is really, you wouldn't believe it unless you saw the pictures of, it might not be snowing in Glasgow, but it's definitely snowing up north, and it's, you know, we're talking about, you know, feet worth of snow. How do you construct something during that? How do you allow for that?
The planning's hard. So if you're in Dornell, the altitude is just crazy. I remember when we were building it, we could build on one side of the site, but we couldn't build on the other, and that's because of the altitude differences. So you really need to be flexible. And I think one of the key things is, and Scott will go into that as well, is building up trusted relationships and teams, teams that are effective. So not only the internal team, the teams with like Sarah and asset operations and operational guys, but then also our contractors, our supply chain. We put a lot of energy in renewables just to build that relationship up with civil contractors, electrical contractors, turbine contractors, so when the challenges come along, you're working together to solve them.
And I was going to say, one of the things that EDF is really very good on and takes very seriously is health and safety, and that must be something that's incredibly difficult at a construction site, because there's lots of people doing different things, lots of contractors. How do you manage that side of things?
Again, it's the planning, and zero harm is our ambition, and it's the paramount. You know, our supply chain share that as well. So again, I talk about the relationship. We know our contractors very well. You know, INH Brown we've worked for a number of years, and they know how we operate. We know how they operate, and we've got that shared ambition with health and safety. So we do all the standard stuff you'd think on the construction site, but we do workshops to make sure we're giving everybody a chance to see that it is our #1 priority, and that anyone on site can speak up if they think something's not safe.
Okay, I'm going to come to you, Scott, because you're sitting there patiently. So do you want to tell us a little bit about INH Brown first of all? I mean, we've worked with you, as Ian said, on a number of projects.
Yes. INH Brown was started by my uncle Ian and my father Hardy in 1964, and it started off as an earth moving a plant hire company, and then developed into civil engineering, contracting. We're also involved in farming and some other things, but the backbone of the business is civil engineering contracting. I came into the business as the second generation in 1983. I'm another finance guy, so I'm not an engineer, but obviously I look after the company as a whole, and we employ about 250 people. We were involved in our first wind farm civil engineering contract in 2007. So since then we've been involved in about 90 different projects.
Wow, 90!
Yes, I mean that did surprise me when I was gathering some statistics for today. I think some of these contracts might have been quite small, but but nevertheless, we've been involved in a number of large developments, and EDF are one of our main customers. So as Ian was saying, that's our bread and butter. The importance of onshore wind farm for us, it represents about a quarter of our turnover, and we're not the only civil engineering contractor in Scotland, obviously. So it's a very important source of work, particularly the onshore wind work did come along when we had the downturn in about 2007, 2008. So it was very welcome to the civil engineering industry at that time. But it's kept going, and today we probably of our 250 staff, we are probably employing about 70 on wind farms at any one time, and we're probably working on perhaps 4 or 5 projects at any one time. So
you're obviously, you're experienced
Yes.
people in your firm, you're
Yes.
experienced at working in this industry and on onshore wind.
Yes.
How do your guys that are out on the ground feel about working in onshore and in renewables? Is it something that do they talk about it in a favourable way, or?
Yes, I think they're all, as Ian said, the guys are all passionate about what they do, and that starts from some of the guys who are office based, who are getting involved with our clients at a very early stage, and we talk about early contractor involvement, and that might be when our clients like EDF are doing budgets. They're looking at the feasibility. Can this be built given the location? The ground conditions vary, so it does always impress me how passionate some of our younger people are, the engineers, in the way that they can find solutions to overcome difficulties. And we've seen that at West Ben Har right now, where we've got a very novel design for foundations and hard standings where the cranes sit, and we're working on extensive depths of peat, and we're being careful not to disturb that.
Yep.
So we're doing piling, and that's at a sort of cutting edge, and hasn't been done too often before. But the guys are certainly very passionate about what they do. Yeah.
And in terms of, it's not just renewables you work in, so what makes a renewables project maybe different from another one, or is there anything, or the civils, you just talked about a particular situation which is slightly new and trying out for the first time, but normally is it just like doing civils somewhere else, or is it slightly different? Are there other things you have to consider?
It's slightly different. Location is generally different, because you're often out in the wilds at altitude.
Up a mountain
and
somewhere.
Yes, and I've been on a number of the sites, and you're often working on quite steep gradients. You're having to design the roads, keeping the gradients to a certain pitch, because you've got to remember that the heavy components are going to be coming in and tracking up there. So I think location can make the jobs quite challenging. But in terms of the work we're doing, it's bulk earthworks. It's a lot of it's involving the concrete pads that are put in place, and each pad can have 600 cubic meters of concrete, and that's quite a challenge, bringing that onto site, and the reinforcing work that goes into these pads. We often do some of the cabling works as well. So it is different. It's different to building a bridge or building a road. The roads that we're putting in generally aren't surface with tar macadam. They're usually just a hard stone road, and that's the sort of sensible way to do it.
So at EDF Renewables, we talk about trying to accelerate to net zero. That's what we want to do.
Yes.
Is that something that you as a company are conscious of net zero targets, of climate change, and how you can kind of be part of that, or are part of it?
I think everybody in whatever business you're running these days, you've got to have your mind on changing towards net zero. And you know, we're reading all the time about other companies that are doing this, and we're also looking at it as well. And I think it's being, you know, it's being demanded by our clients. You know, they are moving in that direction. We've got to move in that direction as well. We below us, we have suppliers. We'll be putting pressure on them. So I think, and it's everybody's doing it willingly. I think it's a move that we're all making, and for good reason. You know.
And what would your message be to all these people from across the world that are here in Glasgow today at Cop26? I mean, what would your kind of overriding message be to them?
Well, I mean, I would be saying, you know, it's not just talking about it. I think we want to see, you know, that converted into action, and you know, and it's not for us, it's for our, you know, children and grandchildren. So I think let's have action.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah,
Scott. And
yeah.
Ian, I was going to ask you the same question. What would your message be? I mean, you know, we're not speaking directly to them, but you know, other people are watching this. What would you say to them?
I think it's much the same, really. I mean, there will be a lot of talking during COP26. It's what happens after that. It's the commitments that are given within COP26, and then what's the action afterward. I think that's the key thing, and we just need to keep the pressure on to make sure the people that can make those commitments are in those positions to make the commitments do it.
Great, okay. Thank you both for joining us. That's great, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
And
Thank you.
I'm going to take a short break, but we will be back with hearing from Rachel and Joe, who are going to talk about the community side of onshore wind, and then we're going to have a couple of our technical team in to talk about what it actually takes to do the day-to-day running of an onshore wind farm. So thanks very much for watching so far. We'll be right back. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Energy Transition Hub at Cop26, which is right across the river from the Blue Zone, where world leaders are hopefully discussing making a difference and getting to net zero as quickly as we possibly can. My name's Lindsay Southworth, and I'm here from EDF Renewables, and we're here to talk about onshore wind, and specifically the faces of onshore wind, the people who are behind this industry, the really important people. And I'm now joined by Rachel Searle, who is from Foundation Scotland, and I'm joined by Joe Hurst, who is a member of the community in Avonbridge, which is right next to Burnhead Wind Farm, which is an EDF Renewables wind farm. Welcome, ladies, and thank you so much for being here. Rachel, first of all, do you want to talk a little bit about what Foundation Scotland actually does?
Thank you, Lindsay, and great to be here. So Foundation Scotland is a Scottish charity, and we basically help individuals and companies and other trusts or foundations fund good causes in communities. So communities can then really make a difference in those communities and improve people's lives.
And basically what happens with EDF Renewables and with lots of other renewable companies, not just us, is that you manage we have a third party, that's yourselves, Foundation Scotland, who manage our funds. So we give money to communities, but it's at arm's length, so that communities are allowed to make their own decisions about where that money goes. And you've done this for quite a wee while, Rachel, haven't you? We've known each other a long time.
We have.
And so tell us about, how things have changed from when you started to now. There must be a lot more onshore wind.
Yeah. So about 15 years ago, when some of the turbines were first going up in Scotland, and some of the companies were coming to us saying, look, we can put the turbines up, but we really want to support wider benefit in the community and make this annual payment, but we can't do that. Can you help us do that, because you're a grant maker? So we relished that opportunity, and we began working out with communities how to do that. So initially there was just a flurry of communities that we were working with, and now we're actually working with over 300 communities across Scotland, about 60 plus community benefit funds, each with their own arrangement and eccentricities and fantastic things happening. And I think the main story through those 15 years really has been communities becoming more assertive about how they want to use that amazing windfall of money. Communities becoming more empowered in how to do that, and communities actually really giving thought to that and developing things like community action plans, so they have a vision of where they want to get to, rather than just thinking, oh, we'll spend the money on that, or oh, we'll spend the money on that. So I think the real significant change has been how community benefit funds have really enabled communities to really begin to think long term, because what community benefit funds are doing are providing an assured form of finance and funding for communities, which is absolutely unprecedented. And absolutely unprecedented.
Can you think of any kind of examples maybe of where, somebody was maybe quite sceptical about an onshore wind farm being built in their area, and then maybe because of how the community has worked with the developer or yourselves, has that attitude changed?
So great to have Jo sitting alongside me.
Yes.
And I think she'll tell a few stories in a moment. But if I think of the community that Jo's part of, I think there was quite a lot of scepticism about the Burnhead project, which is just down the M8, not too far from here. And possibly there was even more scepticism when EDF suggested to the communities that they might need some support and assistance with managing a community benefit fund, and we worked hard to build a relationship with Jo and other community members, and some of what's happened in Burnhead has been absolutely transformative. So I think the reality of the community benefit money, Lindsay, once it comes in, once people begin to see visible, tangible impact, then I think people begin to see that the wind farm on the hill is actually doing a lot more than just generating electricity. It's generating community health, it's generating community well-being, and it's generating a different future for that community. That sounds utterly rehearsed, and it's not at all.
No, it's definitely not rehearsed. I can definitely vouch for that. But I mean, I was going to say, you know, I think it's you know, during COVID, a couple of people already have mentioned that we were able to kind of use funds to, you know, to help people. I know for in the hill foots near Clackmannanshire, we have our Burnfoot Hill wind farm. We've managed to kind of allow to have money to help a delivery service for maybe people who couldn't get out of their houses during lockdown, so that they could get their shopping brought to them or their prescriptions and things like that. So I think just if you could touch on some of the more practical things that the money can be used for as well.
Yeah. Okay. So. Gosh, lots of examples. A great example up in the Highlands. It's not an EDF project, but or not an EDF site, but the community's health centre was ravaged by fire, and the community were going to lose that health service, which in a rural area is pretty critical. And the leading community organisation was adamant that wasn't going to happen, and with community benefit money they actually built a whole new building that they are now leasing out to the local health board, and they have retained that health service, and they are accruing an income from renting out that building. And in a fund up in the northeast, which is actually quite focused unusually on climate smart futures. So unusually for a community benefit fund, it has been quite directive about the kind of outcomes it wants to achieve. There have been projects that have really supported community buildings to become climate smart, as well as supporting more sustainable travel options. We've developed a host of education and training funds, which Joe will talk about in a moment, related to Burnhead. But another example of a kind of project is, Lindsay, where a community realises that actually it needs some help and support to develop those transformative projects. It might have done its community action plan, but actually to see through the asset transfer of a neglected building, or to develop its recreational facilities, it needs some help. So they actually use some of their community benefit fund to pay a development officer to help them take forward that project. And that development officer, because some of these projects happen because there are volunteers working all the hours of day and night, etc. But sometimes you do need to pay people to get the job done.
Absolutely.
Another example in South Ayrshire is where a community benefit fund is making a transformative impact by supporting a large recreational facility with a guaranteed payment each year, so that organisation will become sustainable. So when the community benefit fund stops, it won't fall off a cliff. And that single investment of about 30k a year is having a huge impact on the lives of thousands of people roundabout who access and use the facility over the course of a year.
And we should say, probably something I haven't said already actually, is that, you know, an onshore wind farm has a lifespan of about 25 to 30 years. So
generally operational lifetime of a wind farm.
Yes. So I mean, we're talking about a fund every year for the lifetime of that wind farm, and it may be in some cases that then, you know, that wind farm is kind of, you know, it might stop after 30 years, but another wind farm might be put up in its place. So you just never know. But I think in terms of communities, are you seeing communities thinking about climate change, thinking about how they can implement things that will help us get to net zero when they use the funds?
So more and more. So historically, trying to think about the environmental impact of a project was always a kind of requirement in the funding guidelines, but it was kind of in the tiny small print that people didn't really take much notice of. That's changed, and it continues to change, and we're now asking communities, and communities are asking us to look at the environmental impact of projects much more deliberately and much more intentionally. And I think it is going to happen much more quickly now. It's going to accelerate. That community benefit funds are going to more explicitly be demanding and requiring projects to really take on board the climate emergency.
And we're here at COP. Joe, we're coming to you in a second because I know you've got a really positive story to tell. But you know, what would you say to everyone that's here at COP in Glasgow? I mean, how does what you do fit into all of this?
I think if I could have the platform to say something to folk attending the conference, it would be as we try and chart a way through the emergency that's facing us. Communities are pivotal. Communities are in the midst of this, being impacted by climate, you know, the climate emergency, and any change and development must happen with communities as the partner with communities. We can't do two communities, and where community benefit arrangements have worked well, they have worked well because communities have been not done to. You know, the developer, the third party like Foundation Scotland, the local authority, you know, whoever has worked alongside communities, and communities have been an equal partner around the table. And, you know, we will better address the climate emergency facing us if communities are recognised as equal partners in the solution.
Okay, thanks Rachel. And Joe Hurst, you are from Avonbridge.
Avonbridge and Stanburn.
Avonbridge and Stanburn, which is right next to Burnhead Wind Farm, and which is one of EDF Renewables projects. And I think just to kind of kick off, I mean, you have been involved from the very start really in the community fund. And how is it working for your area? What kind of things have you managed to kind of get out of it, if you like?
Well, we've had very positive response initially. Right at the very beginning, as Rachel said, we had our teething problems. I was chair of the community council at the time. I've been a community council for the last 12 years, and we were approached initially when the original planning consent went in. We objected because the overall view of the community is that they did not want the wind farm. However, we then negotiated with different parties, we met planners, etc. The application did go through, and then there were 3 areas surrounding Burnhead that would benefit: ourselves, Blackridge and Limerick and Slamanan. So we were then approached individually, but I realised that the best thing to do was to approach this collectively. So I contacted Blackridge Community Council, I contacted, there was no community council in Limerick and Stanburn, but we did contact some community representatives from different organisations. We collectively got together as a group, and then we had a number of meetings with Foundation Scotland. And at that stage, we managed to renegotiate the deal because we've been offered a certain amount of money, which we thought was probably a little shy of what it should have been, and we'd looked at other areas around the country. We managed to renegotiate our fund. So it was a fund for every area that really made a significant difference. So we started on approximately 35,000 a year, which was fantastic. But then 20% of that was reserved for education and training purposes. Now we decided that we wanted that to be something specific to our area and our community. So we developed an education and training plan of our own. Because we didn't want it to just be associated with renewables. We wanted it to be associated with, to be accessible to every member of the community, whether you were going to be a hairdresser, a forklift truck driver, an HGV driver, a dog groomer, whatever you wanted to be, you had to have access to the Education and Training Fund. So we developed that fund, which has been extremely successful. We've now had, I think, a total of something like 125 applicants per year over the last 5 years, which has been fantastic, and we've helped all sorts of people. We have trained HGV drivers, we've trained forklift truck drivers, we have assisted medical students, we've assisted plumbers, we've assisted engineers, we've assisted all sorts of people. So students can apply to that fund. Older members of the community can apply to that fund to retrain. If someone's been made redundant, they can apply to for funding, and it's not a huge amount of money, but it's an amount of money over maximum of 4 years. But it's something like £900 in the first year as a student. So you can buy a laptop, you can buy tools. You know, it's a subsistence allowance for travelling or food or whatever's needed, because Avonbridge and Stanburn, we are the southernmost point of the Falkirk area. public transport system is reducing all the time. So access to getting into Falkirk, to get to Stirling, to get to maybe West Lothian College, Falkirk College, universities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Stirling, people need assistance with that. So the education and training programme has been fabulous, and we did find initially that a number of people were quite nervous about applying for money, didn't really understand how to go about it, would like to do a course, didn't quite understand how to apply. So we then decided that we would employ an outreach worker who was a local person who lived in the community, so everybody knew that person. We appointed them on essentially a self-employed basis, and they were working for us 6 hours a week. So we put them in situ in the community hall. People could approach them, they could help to get access to complete an application form, to look for a course, to just have a bit of guidance on how to apply to the fund, and that has been so successful. We had a 60% increase in applications to the fund as a result. The fund was completely and utterly oversubscribed, so the three different geographical groups all agreed to donate more of their main fund to support the Educational Training Fund because it's been so successful. Now, as a result of our success in Avonbridge and Stanburn, and because we were having group meetings with the two other areas, they then said, well, this isn't fair because these guys are far more successful with their fund than we are. So we then rolled out the outreach programme to the other two areas, and our outreach worker is now working 18 hours a week for the benefit of the three areas, and that has had a tremendous impact.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing.
And the model's
Yes.
been replicated across at least 12 other funds in Scotland now.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to do a wee plug for EDF Renewables in here and say we were the first
Absolutely.
renewables company that
Absolutely.
did do the education and
Yes,
training fund.
you were.
And I'm so pleased that it's been so
You
successful.
were.
We do it at our Moyley wind farm as well, and it's such a fantastic
And hats
thing.
off to EDF, actually, Lindsay, big shout out, because EDF at the outset were keen, like Joe said, that the fund supported renewables activity, and Joe and team with support from ourselves said, yeah, but these communities need hairdressers, they need teachers, they need forklift truck drivers.
Yep.
So actually EDF, can you give a bit of slack there? And EDF were absolutely supportive
But I
of that.
think it's really kudos to you, Joe, because you and other members of the community have worked so hard to make it work. But
Yeah.
I think there's other projects as well that have come out of the fund, aren't there? I think you talked about
yes.
is it a playground?
Oh, well, what we've done is that. So that was initially 20% of the fund was dedicated to education and training. Then the remainder of the fund, we did do a community action plan.
You did?
Rachel quite rightly told us we could use some of our funding to pay to have the community action plan done by consultants. We then decided that we didn't want to spend our community money on paying a consultant to do something, so we would apply for other funding. So we were very lucky. We were able to secure £10,000 from the CARES funding, the local energy resources, to pay for our community fund, which meant that we saved all our money to actually spend on projects. We then set up a micro grant fund via the community council, because to apply for main projects you need to be a constituted group. You need to have a chair, a secretary and a treasurer. You need to have accounts and all this kind of thing. In small communities people find that very, very intimidating, and we've found that people have not got the confidence to initially go out there and say, oh, I want to do a £5,000 project, we've got all these people together, we've done this, we've got a constitution today. That's very intimidating. So what we said is if we had a micro grant scheme, the micro grants would be up to £150. You apply to the community council, and it can be applied for by a small group, it can be individuals, and we've supported any number of organisations. So we support the two parent councils for the two local primary schools, which is great. So we've paid for things like buses to the Highland Show, we've paid for extracurricular activities, for a pantomime, for after school clubs, for visitors to come into the school, we've paid for music clubs, bought ukuleles, all sorts of things. So, but we've helped the local Homing Pigeon Society, we've helped the Kids Club, we've helped the Toddler Group, we've helped the local gardening club, all sorts of things. Bluebell bulbs for the local park.
And an important thing about that, Joe, if I can just say, is that whilst they're tiny little projects for, arguably kind of leisure recreational things, they actually help spread the benefit of the fund.
They do.
And it means that a much wider proportion of the community are feeling the impact of this funding, and it's making some qualitative difference to them, because they go to the pigeon homing club not just because they're interested in pigeons, but it's a way they can see their mates. It's a way they can kind of, you know, have some informal support. So those kind of small grants are really important in terms of building social capital in communities.
Yes.
But you've done bigger projects too, haven't
Well,
you,
yes.
Jo?
I mean, the microgrants have got the message through to the community that this money is there, this money is available, and then it's given more confidence. So we've moved on from that, and we've done larger projects over the term. We're now in our 5th year, we're just coming into our 6th year. So over the period, I think we've had approximately £185,000, and to date we've spent £117,485 of the money, and we've got £61,000 left in the pot, and that has been spent on a number of things. We've been paying for transport on an annual basis for the 2 primary schools, so that the children can go to extracurricular activities like swimming lessons and things like that, which otherwise they weren't able to do. We've refurbed the ladies' toilets in the local community hall.
That's very important.
We have, yes, absolutely. We have done the refurbed the kitchen in the local community hall. We have done projects in the community park in Stanburn, behind the school. We've just done a very large, the largest project we've done is actually in one of the recreation parks, and we built a cycling pump track, which was an investment of £30,000. Now that has been fantastic, because what we've found is, because we have access to our wind farm fund and we can attract funding from that, once we have that funding we can apply to other funding partners for match funding, and as a result we have managed to attract over £110,000 worth of funding to Avon Bridge. It's a small village which only has, 1,400 residents. That's a phenomenal amount of money, and as a result we've built the pump track, and we're now going on to do phase 2, which is putting in large-scale play equipment. We're then looking at doing a planting project, so we can put in trees, we can put in a wildflower area, a picnic area, and we're doing the same up in Stanburn as well. So we've managed to, on the basis of the pump track funding, we've attracted £60,000 for Stanburn village. Now that's a village which only has 790 residents, so it's a phenomenal amount of money to attract into these communities, and by doing that it's shown other community groups. I mean, that's being done by a group called Avon Bridge and Stanburn Recreation Initiative. We also have the Community Hall Association, we also have the Community Council. We've been able to install defibrillators in the village. We've erected Christmas trees in both villages for the last 3 years with lights. We've now got lamppost lighting and Christmas lighting through the village of Avon Bridge. We're hoping to roll that out in Stanburn as well, but at the moment the lamp stand is being replaced by the council, so we couldn't put them on last year because they'd have been ripped down and disappear. So we're waiting for the new rollout programme of that, and then we'll have Christmas lights through the village, which are amazing.
And these are communities that have been significantly underinvested in over the years. And I think this Burnhead is a great example, because we often hear that onshore wind is almost, the community benefit is just investing in affluent communities because, they're in windy places where people can afford to live. That's not always that's not the story actually, but Burnhead's a great example where it's really not the story, and where the community benefit money is actually addressing issues like poverty, it is making a difference to equality of opportunity, and I think that story maybe needs to be told a bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible the amount of things that you've managed to put the money into and the difference it's making. What would you say to another community? I mean, do they have to be super organised to do all of this stuff? What would your advice be to them? Because it sounds like you're a very organised person, Jo. You're used to doing these kind of things. What would you say to someone who's maybe not in that position?
I would say don't be afraid. I'd say ask for help, ask for assistance, ask for support, because we've been challenged by the other areas. I mean, my phone is ringing constantly, emails coming in. How did you build a trump track? How did you do that? We've now got we've got our own YouTube channel on. With pump track riders and stuff. We've become the coolest village in the Braes on Facebook, which is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. So I would say to others, don't necessarily think big. Don't think, oh, go for the biggest project ever and think it's unachievable. Start small. Start with something that you understand, but don't be afraid to ask for help. And in the same way as Limerick and St Manor, they're now advertising for a development officer to actually assist them to do similar projects that we've been able to do. We're lucky because we've got a number of individuals and a number of people in the area that have a background in maybe commercial development or investment, or we've got accountants, we've got some bankers and things. We're very lucky to have that, which is great. And we've got a lot of people that have got a vision. We've got some very environmentally minded people who are now taking the local community park forward, and we're doing lots of replanting, and we're looking at the health of different trees, and we're working with pond life, and that's fabulous. And all these projects are being combined with the school as well. We've got a joint head between the two primary schools, so the children are all being involved. We've been doing lots of bikeability training. That led to doing, to the idea, because I thought, well, if we're doing the bikeability, why don't we have a pump track? And then, the kids can actually just, be out on their bikes, and then you're looking at all, the healthy aspect of that, getting them out into the outdoors. They're getting lots of exercise. So we've now got an active travel group as well that's grown in the area. So we're looking at doing sort of riding, walking, cycling tracks all around the region. We're working now with the Braes Green Space Network, and we're looking at connecting all the villages by improving our core paths. So yeah, I just say, it just grows. Once you start, it just grows. So don't be afraid, don't be nervous, ask for help, look at projects that have been done by other people, phone people up and say, how did you do it? How did you plan it? Do you have a copy of your constitution? How do you do your accounts? Have you any chance I could get a copy of that? Just everything is out there. There is so much information available. There's always a group somewhere that's already done it, or something similar. So don't reinvent the wheel.
So just to kind of sum up, would you say you'd say onshore wind has been a very positive thing for your community?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, right at the beginning, when we looked at it, and EDF said, oh, well, we'll reassess this over 5 years because we know there are communities, especially communities like ours in a deprived area, where you don't think that the community necessarily has the capacity. And they said, oh, we'll revisit this in 5 years, because if you haven't spent all the money, there'll probably be a reduction. Now that, to me, was a red rag to a bull, because that's a challenge. So I thought, I can spend this money, we're having a good go at. We haven't absolutely completed that, but we've got lots of projects, in the pipeline, and we will be able to spend that money. And I think it's been a huge benefit to our community, and will continue over the next 20 years. And now we've got the ideas that are coming through and the confidence that it's built. And once somebody sees one group do it, they think, well, if they can do it,
I want that.
I want that, and why can't we do this, or could we not do that, and what about this? And it's just small building blocks, and building confidence is the key.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks to both of you, and thanks very much for being here this morning. It's been really interesting talking to you. I'm going to invite our next set of guests on, if you don't mind. So our next set of guests are Andrew Armstrong and Sean Sessford, both of who work in our asset operations side of the EDF Renewables business. Hi guys, thanks very much for being here. Andrew is one of our technicians, and you have got an interesting story to tell in terms of how you got into the job. And Sean, you're managing a team of 9 at Falgo Rig, which is where we heard from our earlier guests at Roxburgh Estate. So Andrew, how did you get into this? I know the story, but you tell people the story.
Basically, just had a mechanical background, working in workshops, factories, and also got to work on gas turbines, which I found most interesting, working alongside Alstom that worked on the generator side. And living in the local Braes area, like you were just talking there, I noticed more turbines popping up, and that's when I seen EDF recruiting for apprentices at Forth Valley College. So applied for that, took the plunge, wanted to go for it. They liked that I had the mechanical history, but realised you're going to need some electrical, and this is what I was needing, because I knew it was the future. So they've put me through my NVQ as a multi-skilled maintenance technician and also HNC in electrical engineering. Here I am today.
And so, I mean, that was, how long was the college course? Was it a couple of years?
It was 3 years. First year was based at Wolf Valley College, and then the second and third year was site-based and 1 day a week, day release.
Okay, and I know you've got a colleague, Kieran, who also was on that course with you, and you're both now working full-time as technicians at EDF Renewables. Tell us a bit about where you're based and what you're doing, because you're from the kind of, we talked about Burnhead, you're from that kind of area, Falkirk, that's where I live as well.
Yep.
Great area to live. So you're from that area, and it's kind of allowed you to stay in that area, hasn't it?
Yep, the benefits is I've got a young family, so I've got central Scotland sites, so I'm travelling hardly any time, and I get home every night to spend time with my family, and that's a good benefit, because I know a lot of companies would have you here, there and everywhere, but EDF's approach to work-and life balance is really positive.
That's great. And tell us about, so you're at the Livingston Service Centre.
Yes.
And that's your kind of base with your team, but what wind farms are you working on it?
So I work at Burnhead, Burnfoot Hill, which I'm meant to be getting leadership over alongside another technician, Chris Liddle, and Long Park, which is down closer to the borders.
And so, I mean, for a lot of people, they won't really understand what you guys do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, to me, the thought of strapping myself on and going to the top of a turbine is pretty horrifying, but that's what you do every day, right?
Yep.
Tell us a wee bit more about it. What's a typical day like for you?
It's pretty diverse, because it really depends on the planner. You could be your planned preventative maintenance, reactive, which means you're on call. So if there's a breakdown, you've got to react and fix it. And then you get your main components, which you've got to get the cranes in, you're up the top, taking out full gearboxes or generators, whatever it may be. So it does constantly keep changing.
It's not really a job for someone with a fear of heights though, is it?
I wouldn't say so.
No. I mean, what's it like when you're at the top of a turbine? What does it actually feel like? Does it feel pretty amazing?
Well, when you're up the top, sometimes you can forget, but every now and again it'd be like you're on a boat.
Depends on the wind speed.
But it depends on the wind speed,
Yep.
and if you've got to go out on the roof, say for instance, to do the coolant change, it's a constant reminder. Woof.
And so, I mean, it must be quite weather dependent. Obviously, the turbines, if there's no wind, the turbines aren't turning, or if the wind is too strong, sometimes they're not turning either. What do you do on days like that? Because you never know really what's going to come up.
Planning, admin, there's constantly things you could be doing, work around the service centre. So you're never just sitting twiddling your thumbs, because you have got to plan for the next thing, constantly shifting the planner.
Especially on low wind days, because you want to be in the machines doing the work, like snagging that you've picked up during services.
Right, okay.
Because you don't want to be stopping the machines when they're producing. You're not producing electric when they stop, so.
Some jobs you need wind, some jobs you don't need wind. It's trying to get that in.
Best of both worlds, really. And so in terms of you're a young guy, you've got a young family, do you have other friends that work in renewables? What do your pals think, and your family think about what your job is?
No, usually when I talk to people about working in a wind turbine, they're, oh, you work up inside them? Do you climb on the outside of them? A lot of people are quite inquisitive, and because my daughter stays in a nursery where there's a wind turbine out the back, she knows what I do, and she's always going, that's my daddy's works, and she can't go past a wind turbine without saying, my daddy works in there, and it's a good feeling to know that she can't go past the wind turbine without thinking about her dad.
And what about, I mean, does it make you feel good in terms of, that you're working towards, we talked about net zero and lowering carbon emissions. How does it make you feel to work in onshore wind, in renewables, that's making a big difference towards those targets?
It's the next big thing. It's what everybody's constantly thinking about, how do we get to net zero? So it's a really positive feeling to know that I'm a part of that and I'm helping.
And what would you say to somebody who is maybe watching this or is just interested in Cop26 and is thinking, I'd really like to work in renewables? What would your advice be to them?
Oh, I would definitely go for it, because even myself being an apprentice to where I am now, I'm constantly progressing through the tech progression. I'm never standing still, and I'm going at a good steady rate. And there's other avenues I can go down, so that you don't need to just come on as a technician. There's so much more you could do in renewables, so just get involved.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Andrew. And Sean, so you are the lead tech for Falago Rig on the Roxburgh estate.
Yes.
You're leading a team of 9.
Yep.
What are the kind of challenges that you face on a daily basis?
Constant changing in plans. As you said before, the weather dominates mainly everything in our job. So you can come in the morning and have planned to do, say, an MCR, mains component replacement. could be
What's an
blowing
MCR? Just
mains
for
component replacement, so
Right.
gearbox, anything like that, generator, rotor off, roof off. But it all depends on the wind. So you could say you could be doing that in the morning by turn up on sites, 10 metres per second winds. That's not happening. So it's just that's the main challenge: a constant changing and planning.
And what does that mean for your team? I imagine you'd all have to be quite resilient because
Yeah, pretty much.
best laid plans go out the window.
Yeah, I send out a planner every Friday, and it will change by the Friday afternoon. And it's just you just have to try and you get used to it. You get used to your team gets used to it. They moan at me the whole time about it, but they get used to it. Just change and adapt.
And so, how long have you been doing the job? I know you transitioned from
Yeah.
oil and gas, didn't you? So,
Well, it was
so talk a wee bit.
onshore drill. It was onshore and nearshore drilling. So I done the exploratory works for like deep sea harbours for the gas industry. I didn't work on the platforms, so
Okay.
I went away from that. But I just wanted to be home every night because I was travelling all over the world. Just wanted to be home. So coming into this, I've been doing this 7 years now, and it's just the best thing ever. Because as you say, Andrew says, you're home. You've got a young family home every night.
And what about the job itself? I mean, you must get a lot of job satisfaction as well, whether that's, something that's, a turbine's not working for whatever reason, then you're managing to fix it and get
Yeah.
it back on.
Oh, definitely. I'm not really in turbines these days anymore, to be honest. That's what the team's there for. So I'm just making sure they're out working and the turbines are running. So it's more Andrew's kind of things to be in the machines, getting his hands dirty.
And again, I'd asked a couple of guys on the construction side about zero harm, which is an EDF thing. Health and safety is hugely important. It's the most important thing. How do you make sure that your teams are absolutely paying attention to that? Because I'd imagine if you're working in the same kind of area every day, then you could become complacent.
Oh, you definitely do. So we have safety stand-downs every month. We just come into the office, have a breakfast, chat about things that have happened, any safety issues have been raised, and we'll address them there and then. And as you say, we work to an AWP, which is a written work procedure. So it's got all our safety method statements, risk assessments, everything's there. And you have to sign on to it and read it every day. So you're constantly getting bombarded with making sure you're the safest you can be on that machine.
What would you say about, we've talked about the target of having 30 gigawatts by 2030 in the UK of onshore wind.
Yep.
What would you say to support that? What would you say to convince anyone that needed convinced that needs to happen?
But it's either, say we work for EDF, it's either you have that or you have something else. So we can either go down the route of putting in new, bigger machines, turbines, especially now when you say community fund, things like that. It helps the economy, it helps everybody.
Okay.
It's definitely better for the environment.
And then just finally, I was going to ask you both a quick question about COP. I think I've asked you already, actually, Andrew, sorry.
That's okay.
But Sean, I was going to ask you about COP. All these important people are here. There's a lot of talking going on. What would you like to see happen at the end of the 2 weeks?
Well, to be honest, will anything ever change? That's the main thing. As long as we've got green energy going forward, that's the main thing.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much, guys. Thanks
No
for
problem
joining
at all,
me.
thank you.
And that is the end of our Faces of Onshore Wind piece. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks very much for watching.